for people to join our Zoom call. It is great to see a lot of already familiar faces here. And this is our first morning program, or early morning program on a Friday. So thank you everyone for joining us. Jamie, maybe this is something we should consider in terms of timing and scheduling, but this is looking great. Why don't I go ahead and start? Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our Archive Machines program, Resisting Now, Art and Policy Talk. My name is Stephen Wong. I am one of two curators at the Los Angeles Municipal Art Gallery. And I'm excited to introduce this program. We have a lot of exciting guests, but I first do want to, again, thank everyone for taking time out of your day to join us. I do want to thank Jamie for putting this program together, the other LAMAG staff, but also this exhibit does, this program does come out of an exhibit called Archive Machines, which stems from and continues the legacy of our open calls, which were first instituted in the 1950s when the gallery first opened. And we do engage with the public and have artists submit their works to this program. I mean, to the exhibition. So this is our first online exhibition, which is quite exciting, but it's also it's new for us, and this continues with our online programming. But I do want to also thank to the curatorial team who put the initial exhibition together, Brianna and Stephanie, and I want to thank our DCA staff for contributing and helping out. Daniel, our assistant general manager, should be here, so thank you. Felicia, who's also a panelist, thank you for helping assist this program. I do want to thank Mitch's team, Councilmember Mitch O'Farrell's team, Christine, David, and Tony, and Department on Disability. I think, is it Ross who's doing the closed caption or the transcribing? And so thank you, everyone who has made this program possible today. I do want to start introducing, not introducing, but welcoming our panelists. Mitch O'Farrell, thank you for being here, representing Los Angeles City Council District CD13. So I'm excited to have you here. And I do want to thank Felicia Filer, who is our public art director for the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs. We do have two artists from Archive Machines that will be joining us today, Johanna Breiding and Amir Saadiq. Thank you. And what I would like to do is bring it back to Jamie before we start to do some quick housekeeping.
Thank you, Steve. So welcome again, everyone. Before we turn it over to Sarah and to the speakers, I just wanted to remind everyone to please keep your microphones muted during the speakers' presentations, just so we can avoid feedback and any technical issues. If your microphone is inadvertently unmuted, our LAMAG staff team will take care of muting it for you. And if you have any questions about the speakers' presentations, please enter them directly into the chat box, and the LAMAG staff and moderator will review all questions. And just as a reminder too, given the abbreviated time and specific topic of the conversation, we will do our best to answer or get through all the questions, but not all questions may be addressed. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Steve.
Yeah, and so the person who will be moderating this wonderful panel I want to welcome Sarah Conley Odenkirk. She has 20 years under her belt practicing law in the area of fine arts, focusing on transactional matters related to the arts in the private and public realms. And while maintaining her own legal practice, in 2013 and 2017, Sarah was the Associate Director of the Sotheby's Institute of Arts and Business, Sotheby's Institute of Arts and Art Business and Arts Management master's degree program at Claremont Graduate University. That is a long title for the wonderful work that you did over there, Sarah. During that time, she was also a professor for legal foundations, public art, international transactions, and cultural property and restitution. So with that, Sarah, I'm going to let you take it over from here.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Steve and Jamie, for putting this together. And of course, thank you everyone for being here today. I am delighted and honored to be here with this impressive group of panelists, and we will be moving on to discuss some issues that are very close to my heart, specifically focusing on how art and public policy are employed as catalysts for change. I'm going to start by doing a little bit of a longer introduction for our panelists. And then I'd like to turn it over first to the artists to tell us a bit more about their respective practices. And then we'll have Felicia Filer and Councilmember O'Farrell talk about their roles in championing artists in the arts. I'm going to try to keep things moving with a few questions here and there and keep people on their time. But we're really hoping to wrap this up in the next 40, 50 minutes and open it up for questions. So we look forward to your questions. Keep a note of that, and let's have a good conversation today. So the first person I'm going to introduce is Johanna Breiding, who is an artist, one of the artists here today. She's an interdisciplinary artist who employs analog and digital technologies to achieve queer narratives and underrepresented voices. Through varying forms of collaboration, Johanna depicts the importance of kinship and intergenerational exchange via autobiography, historical events, and the landscape as witness. They have exhibited widely through the US and Europe and received numerous awards from DAAD, Rima Hort Mann, and the Swiss International Film Festival. Their work has been written about in Art Forum, Art in America, and Hyperallergic, to name a few. Can't wait to see what Johanna is presenting today. Councilmember Mitch O'Farrell represents the 13th District, as Steve mentioned, for the Los Angeles City Council. He is passionate about safe neighborhoods and improving the quality of life, perhaps, in Atwater Village, East Hollywood, Echo Park, Elysian Valley, Glassell Park, Historic Filipino Town, Hollywood, Little Armenia, Mid-Wilshire, Koreatown, Thai Town, and Silver Lake. I think that covers all of LA, right? Years of public service precede Councilmember O'Farrell being elected to the Los Angeles City Council. He brought with him a strong background of working with government at every level. And since being sworn into office in 2013, he has made a strong impact on children and family safety in our neighborhoods, improved commercial corridors while enhancing the pedestrian and bicycle experience, and has set the Los Angeles River on a path to environmental restoration and accessibility by championing 5 bridge projects to better connect the neighborhoods that embrace the waterway. Councilmember O'Farrell lives with his partner in Glassell Park and is the first openly gay person to be elected to the 13th Council District seat. Felicia Filer, who is our third panelist, is the Public Art Director for the City of Los Angeles' Department of Cultural Affairs. She directs the she does lots of communication. She directs the commission and fulfillment of over 250 permanent municipal public art projects throughout the city. Additionally, she directs the administration and management of the city's private 1% for Art program and the city's art collection, commissioning 15 original temporary public art installations and over 150 public programs and events at 15 locations. Felicia, I don't know how you do it all. This is so much work. Previously, Felicia worked as a senior management consultant and loan fund manager for Arts, Inc., a former Los Angeles nonprofit's arts management consulting organization. She's a native of Los Angeles and earned a BS in economics from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and an MBA in finance and marketing from the Peter F. Drucker and Masatoshi Ito Graduate School of Management, Claremont Graduate University. See, all of us from who have worked or gone to CGU have long titles. Filer's professional interests include designing systems to facilitate governmental support of innovative models of public art. Finally, we've got Amir Saadiq, who is our second artist and fourth panelist. Amir Saadiq's practice focuses on challenging social norms and representation while exploring the intersectionality of economics, politics, activism, and Blackness. As a Black man, he has seen the generational effects of systemic oppression. His work aims to diversify the traditional canon of photography by using images to spark culturally relevant conversations. And luckily, both artists today have provided several images of their work, so they will talk about that. And we will start now with that presentation. Jamie, I don't know if you want to pop up the images that you have, but I'd like to start by asking the artists to each give a brief statement about the inspiration for your work and how this time of change and increased attention on advocacy and social justice has impacted your practice. And with that, Johanna, why don't we start with you?
Excuse me, I was muted. Thank you, Sarah, and Jamie, thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you all for being here. Yeah, so I spent the summer of 2017 in Berlin and started studying some of the monuments there. I would ride my bike to the Marx Engels Forum, a monument depicting Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels that is also a big tourist attraction. I became fascinated with their collaboration as political thinkers. Engels, edited Marx's Kapital and also wrote The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. And inspired by these figures' presence and questions around kinship, family, and ownership, I started documenting families, lovers, friends, school classes who would visit the monument and take pictures with it. I was especially fascinated with the parts of the sculpture that were constantly being touched. So like people sitting on Marx's lap or holding Engels' hand, touching their over life-size feet, and these parts of the oxidized copper are literally being polished and revealing the actual golden color that lies beneath that which has been weathered. During this time period, there was also an exhibition, I believe it was titled Unveiled, up at a museum that was outside of Berlin, and that exhibition displayed the final resting place of many controversial political monuments that were brought down by the people over time with the changing of regimes. And there I discovered this granite, this very huge granite Lenin's head that was unearthed in a forest near Berlin. I think it was 24 years after it had been buried, right after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when many of the monuments were coming down. And there was this environmental scandal with the unearthing of Lenin's head, as a colony of these sand lizards were in mating season right before they were planning to dig up the head. And so biologists had to go out there and very gently move the lizards to a new and safe habitat. That just really fascinated me. And yeah, I should maybe say that also this exhibition included, statues, a very claustrophobic array of statues from the Kingdom of Prussia to the German Empire, followed by the Weimar Republic and Nazi Germany. And seeing the storage space made me think about how all these, cis white men, presumably straight, are monumentalized with different forms of rock and metal materials. And I became interested in the violence on these forms, the missing limbs, the gunshot cavities, bombing wounds, etc. And it led me to think about where these works go, and also what becomes with them after, moments and waves of historical reckoning with the violence of one's own history. And so during this time in the US, it's July and August 2017, many people were already demanding the dismantling of monuments of white supremacist and Confederate figures. And there was, and still is very much so, the opposition to this. And I remember the white nationalist rally that turned violent in Charlottesville, Virginia in mid-August. And this led me to start collecting archival footage, media footage, and creating a visual score for choreographer and performer Taisha Paget to perform to perform with, and perform against. And with Taisha's movements, I wanted to focus on the protesters who were dismantling monuments. I wanted to think about the work in a way that would, honor their interventions and to present a quasi-choreographic moving monument of their resistance. So the video is thought of as a triad beginning with labor and tools used to dismantle the monuments, a collective action where the camera is framing the people rather than the monuments. And the second part shows how the ropes are used to pull the monuments down, to see them crash, slide, and implode. The final section depicts the monuments being uplifted in air or transported via waterways, not really ever knowing where they ultimately end up. And then, Sarah, to answer the second part of your question, I don't feel that my practice has shifted, or my artistic practice has shifted during this time of visible change. My practice has always been deeply embedded in collaboration, intergenerational exchange, and interdisciplinary exploration as a means to give voice to marginalized people, queering the very notion of what it means to be an individual artist. And I will say that I've been reading much more and listening deeply, and I'm letting feelings and ritual and psyche take a deeper presence in my practice. And then my teaching practice, which I consider equally important to my artistic practice, is continuously shifting, because I teach photography and theory, and the power of the image, of the camera and video function of our cell phones, for example, is more important now than it ever has been, right? The camera used to document a revolution, and now it spurs the revolution. So I have so much hope in students, in the younger generation, and in making sure that they feel safe, they feel brave, especially, are educated and equally embodied, learn to deeply feel and ready to resist and revolt is a big part of my job as a teacher and a caretaker. And that's where my attention on advocacy for social justice has impacted me most as a person living in the US today.
Do you find that your students are responsive in a different way to what you're teaching them because of what's going on currently?
I think that they're very, aware of what's going on, and it's, other than just really looking at the curriculum, I think it's really important to also be checking in on students' feelings. So I can tell that they are very much embracing having, the collective of the classroom, which is now happening over Zoom. I teach at Williams College, which is in Western Massachusetts. Having the collective of us all being present, I think is really important to them. And I think they're very much aware of what's going on. And for me, it just feels very important also to, be talking about what's going to happen in the upcoming election, to be talking about Black Lives Matter protests, to be talking about anti-Black, racism in the US today, and making sure that students feel heard, or feel like they can use their artistic practice to, in a way, perhaps revolt against what's happening or find a space for healing.
That's great. It definitely seems like perhaps the most important time in history when artists and students are paying attention to that power that they have. Amir, let's take a look at some of the work that you're doing, and I will pose the same questions to you to first talk a little bit about your work, and then talk about if, and I suppose how, if it has changed, how this time of change has impacted the way that you are inspired and producing your work now.
Yeah, so I picked up a camera in 2016. Before that, I worked in tech. Being one of the only Black people in tech, I would always experience microaggressions. And I would travel extensively throughout the United States in this role. And what I was seeing was that these microaggressions were starting to bloom into like just full flowers of hate. So after the election, I left my job and decided I wanted to do more. I have a friend who used to always tell me that there's currency in the community, and I never really understood what she meant. But as I started looking around and trying to figure out, what it was that I wanted to do or how I wanted to do more, I first started working with an organization in Oakland that was working with single moms, providing them with housing and job training. As someone who was raised by a single mom, I intimately understood the challenges of what it means to be a single mother. Through that partnership, we were able to garner awareness and also, resources. From that, I started to branch out into working with mothers in the Bay Area who had lost kids to state murder, specifically Oscar Grant, Celine Tyndall, Mario Woods, and Stephon Clark. I was always amazed by seeing these mothers out in the community, how strong they were, how resilient, to one, make sure that their children were not forgotten, but also to be able to, just have the strength to try to create change. And it was during this time that I started to notice the presence of the Nation of Islam always at this work. So the work that is part of the exhibition is from a series called It Takes a Nation. My first encounter with the Nation of Islam, like many, was through the autobiography of Malcolm X. When I read that book sent me on a path. It's the reason I went to Howard University. It's the reason I majored in African American history, to kind of understand the history of where I was from, the condition of which my people are in. And through that, I had my second experience with the Nation of Islam, and that was during the Million Man March in Washington, D.C. So that was the first time that I had really started to understand like what the power of a counter narrative was. Being in DC in the 90s, it's not like DC today, which is heavily gentrified. So to see a million Black faces in one place just countered the narrative that was out there during that time, because during that time, that was when policies were being implemented, labeling Black people as super predators and things of that nature, and criminal reform. So after that, I started to think more in depth about the nation and like what it is that they mean to the Black community. So I started to study the works of Gordon Parks to try to understand how he was telling the narrative of the Nation of Islam, but also counter the narrative of, what was out there. And what I originally immediately noticed was that this project was something that had to be in Black and white, because when I look at the images that he created and I look at the images that are taken today, it's almost like a juxtaposition of saying, as much as things have changed, they stay the same, or do things change? So as we go through the images of mine that are part of the exhibition, the first one that I'll talk about is the mighty MGT, that stands for Muslim Girls Training. And for this image here, this really is a powerful image to me. And I want to quote a quote by Malcolm X, where he says, "The most disrespected person in America is the American Black woman. The most unprotected person in America is the Black woman. The most neglected person in America is the Black woman." And I think with what we see that just happened with Breonna Taylor, that this still rings true. But when I look at this image, what I see is Black women standing strong, resiliency, and also not just holding their space, but claiming their space. For the second image, can we go to the next one? Yes, so this one is Brother Aziz. Go back one, please. So this image here, Brother Aziz, is really powerful for me as well, because when I look at this image, many times when a Black person's name is heard, it's as a hashtag or with something negative. So I wanted people to know who Brother Aziz was, and I also wanted to give him his roses while he's alive. Also, just thinking about where this work would be housed and thinking about the community that it's made for, lots of times galleries and institutions have been exclusionary or violent towards Black bodies. So I felt that it was important that if this work was housed in this space, that people would see him and know his name and say his name with respect, and not as a hashtag or not as something that's trending on social media. And then the third image, this one is called Homewood Ave. This image was made in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And this image is really powerful to me because after I had left my career in tech, I actually went back for like a month because I was doubting what my purpose was. And this image was made the day after a shooting in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And this area of Pittsburgh could be Oakland, it could be Los Angeles, it could be Washington, D.C. Poverty, gentrification for systemic reasons. But the only people that I saw that was out in the community to address that, was the nation. They were out talking to people, creating programs for drug addiction and things of that nature. So that image there just ties it back to the community for me. And then I will also say too, I think that I was fortunate in the sense of when I started my practice 4 years ago, I was fortunate to be based in Oakland, where I had elders like Elaine Brown, Erica Huggins, and Kat Brooks, all who are doing amazing work. And then also artistically, there were people there that I was able to draw off of, like Dewey Crumpler, Emory Douglas, and Sadie Barnett, who have shown how art can be used to influence social change.
Well, that's great, and obviously you've got a relatively short career at this point as an artist, since this is your second or perhaps third career. And I think it's very interesting that you come from the tech world into this world of expression through photography. And I'm wondering how you feel that timing is affected by the current conversation that's happening as we lead up to these historic elections.
You know, I think it's hard to separate the tech space from the space of just living, because it's a situation where, regardless of where you are with the Black body, there's always the concern for safety. I think what's interesting is being in the tech space and having a voice or opinion. I could be labeled a certain way. So again, as an artist, I can say the exact same thing. And now it's like I have an expression or an opinion. So again, I'm always just interested in how to counter the narratives that are present.
Do you feel, and this is sort of maybe more of a tech question, but do you feel like now that there has been this incredible focus brought to issues of social justice, and people are really paying much more attention to the diversity of speakers, especially as we've moved everything online, do you feel like the ability for artists of color to be in a space that's comfortable for them, in that they're in their own studios or own living spaces, that makes it a more comfortable place from which to speak about a lot of these issues?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's ever an issue of being comfortable or uncomfortable speaking. But again, what I look at is, I think we had this conversation earlier about like being a Black artist or just being a Black person in general. It's like we operate in two realities, one of being hyper visible and at the same time being invisible. So even though we're speaking now, and if we want to take it back to tech, I'm not really interested in being there as speakers. If we're talking about change or social change, I want to see like, what do the boards look like? What is the diversity hiring? Because like as an artist, we're here to express, you know, what it is that we see. So if change is actually going to be made, I think there needs to be more than just having artists coming in. I want to see changes made on the level of boards and things of that nature.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you. I'm going to now turn to Felicia and ask Felicia, Felicia, could you talk a little bit about how the city's extensive art collection establishes a historic record for social movements in Los Angeles? I think we've got a picture here that you'll address, and then also talk a little bit about what happens to the art that's collected, particularly the work that comes out of civil unrest, and how, where, and when it's displayed, and how those decisions are made.
Well, thank you. Thank you for including the format of public art in this conversation about the different visual languages and art mediums that help us shape public discourse around art that comes out of social protest and resistance. And if you think about public art as another kind of archive that also documents histories and stories of resistance and social protest, then public art is uniquely positioned to keep the histories of resistance visible to the public for decades, actually. For instance, in 2011, the Occupy Wall Street protests broke out in New York and spurred protests in communities all over the country, including here in LA. And these protests were in opposition to the 2008 financial collapse on Wall Street and in opposition to wealth inequality in this country. And the activists in the Occupy LA protests set up camp on the South Lawn of City Hall. And in the middle of the encampment site sits the Flint Memorial Fountain. And the Flint Fountain was getting filled with trash by the protesters, and in order to protect the fountain, city workers erected a wooden barricade around the memorial, which is the image that you're seeing here. The protesters ended up using the barricades to paint signs and symbols about the movement. On the morning of November 29th, the then Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa ordered the removal of the protesters from the site. And once the LAPD eviction was concluded and the park grounds restored, the panels were removed and have remained archived in storage by Department of Cultural Affairs since 2012. So here we have an example of protest ephemera that is not visible to the public. Conversely, in the next image, the mural titled "To Protect and Serve" by Noni Olabisi, commissioned by Social Public Art Resource Center in 1996, it's located at Jefferson and 11th Avenue. This mural endures to the public to this day. And the mural commemorates the Black Panther Party of the 1970s. It depicts many of the prominent activists in positions of resistance, including Huey Newton, Angela Davis, and Bobby Seale, to name a few. The mural also depicts acts of police brutality, hooded members of the KKK, as well as the breakfast program started by the Panthers. And the mural was controversial when it went up. Different sectors of the community feared that the mural would instigate violence in the neighborhood. It did not. And though the mural was a site of contestation, for some it was also a place of celebration by others. Similarly, another mural by Noni, Olabisi, and Alma Lopez titled "Education is a Basic Human Right," commissioned by the Department of Cultural Affairs in 1998. It's located inside the Angela Mesa Library on West 52nd Street. And the top of the mural depicts the Mendez family. The Mendez family filed, in 1945, they filed a discrimination lawsuit against the Orange County School District that directed the Mendez children to the quote-unquote Mexican school. And in Mendez v. Westminster, the Mendez families charged that this act of racial segregation violated both the state and US constitutions. In 1947, the court ruled in favor of the Mendez family and effectively desegregated schools in Southern California. And this case served as a precursor to the landmark 1954 Supreme Court case, Brown versus Board of Education, which effectively ended desegregation in schools in the United States. And the iconic image of Ruby Brown being escorted into school by the Kansas City Police is shown in the top third of the mural. The middle of the mural depicts young people protesting in support of human rights, specifically affirmative action, Proposition 209, which is on the ballot to be repealed in this November. This Prop 209 was on the ballot, and funding for education was also under attack. And finally, the bottom third of the mural shows young protesters holding the US flag, overlaid with depictions of their ancestors who have labored in this country for their children to have access to education and time, and ultimately a better future. And finally, the last image is a public art installation by Kim Abeles titled "Walk a Mile in My Shoes," commissioned by the Department of Cultural Affairs in 2014. And this installation is dedicated to the history and power of marching for social change. The work connects local, cultural, and political leaders who have marched and protested in Los Angeles for social change to the heroes of the civil rights movement. It includes photographs of the shoes worn by Dr. King, next image, and other civil rights protesters, including the shoes of, and that seminal picture of Mr. John Lewis and Dr. King marching across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. So in each of these instances, we have public art occupying the dual role of both documenting our histories, critiquing our present moment, and reflecting on the cyclic nature of the social inequities we seek to redress. I'll stop there.
Okay, great. So what happens to the work that was taken down from that park? Where are those panels, and they're stored forever? Is there a plan to display them?
They're stored in our offices, in a storage area in the department's offices. And as I mentioned, they've been there since 2012. And so this idea of, does it make sense for, an institution like the Department of Cultural Affairs to receive these items, put them in storage, if in fact they can't be seen? So unless you have a curator or somebody doing research, that these archives at that point get exposure. But conversely, we have these permanent public artworks that are actually drawing from other archives and other archival image that get displayed, publicly and remain in the public view to sort of look at these issues and recontextualize the issues time and time again.
So for curators who are, or researchers who are interested in exploring what's in the DCA's collection, how would they go about finding out what kind of art you've collected and maintain?
They would have to request, access to the collection, or, give us some indication of what their the subject matter is, the research project is, and then we could determine if we have works in the collection that speak to those images, to their research topic.
And is there a plan at DCA to continue collecting this sort of imagery as it's developed during various protest periods?
No. I think that the panels were, it was just sort of fortuitous that, we kept them, and there was some other ephemera that, that was collected by other institutions and other groups from that Occupy movement, but we currently have not, collected any works that are coming out of the current, Black Lives Matter movements that are happening right now.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, we'll come back to some of those topics, but now I'm going to turn to Councilmember O'Farrell and ask you a couple of questions. Probably too many for you to answer all at one time. But you play a large role in advancing the will of the community to legislate change. Obviously, this is the role of government to some degree. And recently you advanced this motion to set up a working group to address monuments and memorials issues in Los Angeles. What issues do you think are going to be rising to the top in these conversations, and how do you see the arts as driving those issues that make an impression on you and also inspire your actions as a council member?
Thank you, Sarah, for moderating this discussion. Let me just start also by thanking the Municipal Art Gallery, Jamie, Stephen, and on my team, Christine, Tony, and Dave. I thank everyone for pulling this together. And of course, Johanna and Amir, you're amazing artists. And of course, Felicia, who my office just loves working with on so many important policy and district-specific issues. Thank you, everyone. Let me just give a little bit of context before I answer that question, if you don't mind, Sarah, about how I grew up in Oklahoma, exposed to art and the arts at a very young age. All of this with a backdrop of poverty, incredible family strife and issues, and how art has influenced who I am as a human being, to the point of when I was very young, for about a 10-year period, I was a professional dancer and actor. I worked a lot in Los Angeles and I traveled around a lot. And so I brought into my life in public service a perspective I think that not every politician has necessarily. And so that has really informed who I am in my approach and is really part of my DNA at this point. I also grew up as, I also have Native American heritage on my mother's side. My grandfather was chief of a tribe. And so I'm very proud of my Native American heritage as well. Very hyper aware of the great genocide that took place and the consequences that people are still living with, not to mention the consequences of 400 years of slavery, which is at the zeitgeist of everything right now with the protests and the inequality and the injustices and the racism that is institutional. So I just wanted to kind of give that background before I start talking about some of the policy issues that we may be asked about. I'll say that the plight of the artists, like I mentioned, has been at the forefront of my concerns my whole life. Politics, actually holding elective office someday, was completely abstract, foreign, never entered my mind because I didn't think that was a world that was open to me or that would welcome me with my background early on. But here I am. And so I think that since taking office back in 2013, I've always felt before then that Los Angeles has a place and a destiny to become world-class, a home for the arts that could rival any city in the world. We are very far short from that goal, but we should never give up on that. So much has come from Los Angeles in the world of dance, theater, recording, film, other art, sculpture and painting. And so we have a lot to claim and be proud of and grow and nurture. So policy-wise, early in my first term, we unlocked the arts development fee, which had been moribund for 10 years. And that is, in simple terms, roughly 1% of development projects in the city of Los Angeles, the development team has to contribute 1% of the cost of that project to the Department of Cultural Affairs. And it was locked up under a legal determination for 10 years and collecting money, but not being spent anywhere, and certainly not for art projects across the city. So coming into office with my art background, knowing what we were up against, I created the initiative and worked with DCA and other city departments to generate the report that showed the way forward. And we readopted the arts fee. It's been in place now for several years. We started seeing immediate results, and you can see sculptures and murals across the city now that have been created in the last 5 or 6 years because we unlocked the arts development fee. Now, I'm working on increasing that development fee to 2%. And it might seem like a counterintuitive sort of approach right now to increase development fees for arts or anything else in this terrible COVID economy. But since we have to make the findings to increase fees anywhere, we have to make legal findings, and knowing that our TOT, which is our transit occupancy tax, has disappeared and vanished under COVID in this economy, we can probably make the findings now to actually increase the arts development fee. So that's something that we're talking about in my office and with the DCA. That could practically double funding for the arts in Los Angeles if we do this the right way. So that's something that I'm very interested in pursuing and working with the arts community on improving and increasing. Also, the mural ordinance was put on hold as well, something else that I took a part in unlocking. And so we have a mural ordinance in place that protects, that keeps them registered, that makes sure that if they get tagged, they're restored. And so something else I've worked on, and I channeled my brother because he's a painter through that work. Again, arts, you know, my life in public as an elected official being pegged to my life preceding being a Los Angeles City Council member. And lastly, I'll just talk about a few other updates on that, on life experiencing, informing policy. I mentioned earlier, I'm a member of the Wyandotte Nation. First Native American on the Los Angeles City Council, believe it or not. First member of a federally recognized tribe, which was kind of a shock to me. But of course, I get onto the council in 2013. I learned that then, so I immediately adopt a determination and a responsibility and accept the responsibility that I have to change some things. And so knowing that, and dubiously in my family, that Columbus Day is a national federal holiday, and it was a city holiday, and on the administrative code, Columbus Day as a city holiday. So in 2015, I set out to eliminate it and replace the city holiday of Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day. It took 2 years, but we formed a coalition and we were successful, and it was officially adopted 2 years later. And we celebrated the first official Indigenous Peoples Day in 2018. And that is something that we can all be very proud of. And when Los Angeles took that action, other cities had done it before us. But I knew that if we acted that other cities would follow, and it made worldwide news. And sure enough, it was like a domino effect. And of course, that, which we effectuated in 2017, 3 years ago, is very relevant to what's happening now, which I'll get to in a moment, as far as false narratives crumbling as they should, is happening now. 1 year later, we took down the Columbus statue in Grand Park across the street from City Hall. Ironically, City Hall, Grand Park, all the county buildings are built on ancestral Tongva land. That's the local tribe. It was particularly galling that there was a statue of Christopher Columbus on Tongva land, especially when the indigenous people of California, locally and across the state, were really annihilated by the Spanish conquistadors and the colonists, not having anything to do with Columbus, who never set foot in the continental US. Symbols are important, and they're coming down. And years ago, in light of the recent protests, we also are taking this whole movement a step forward with this motion to deassess some of these celebrations that are very, very dubious. We have street names that are named after Spanish conquistadors who hunted Native Americans in Los Angeles County. So I want to take a look at who we celebrate, how we celebrate them, and make sure that we actually adopt a policy so that that the population of Los Angeles can work with city leaders on adopting a policy on how exactly we do celebrate historical figures. So how we also deassess, or do a deaccession on a monument. We know that the statue of Junipero Serra was torn down unceremoniously during the month-long protests in June, and there are other monuments that probably need to come down. So let's figure out how to take a look at street names and really make sure that we don't hold any historical figure in high regard that engaged in oppression, genocide, racism, you name it. That's part of the reckoning, I think, that we are really dealing with. And lastly, as some of you might have heard, there was an ill-fated attempt by the Christopher Street West organization that put on the yearly LA Pride Parade and Festival when they were going to organize a march on Hollywood Boulevard. But they forgot to include the Black Lives Matter organizations and individuals and leaders. And so, and that was going to be organized on Hollywood Boulevard in the 13th District, which I represent. So right around that same time, I was approached by a relatively new organization called the Black LGBTQ Activists for Change. And they were interested in organizing a solidarity march with an all Black Lives Matter theme, highlighting the invisibility of the Black transgender queer community within the wider LGBTQ community. So I was immediately on board with that. And as the lead up to the march, which took place on June 14th, was, the clock was ticking. Literally 2 days before the march, I received an email from a Hollywood company called Trailer Park that had this idea to put an all Black Lives Matter on the pavement on Hollywood Boulevard, right there at Hollywood and Highland. So I checked in with my friends at the BLAC organization, Lucky Alexander and Gerald Garth, and I said, I've got this company that wants to do this. How do you feel about it? What are your thoughts? They checked in with the rest of the board and they embraced the idea. So we all got together. Lucky designed the artwork, and we painted a temporary all Black Lives Matter on Hollywood Boulevard in time for the march. Since then, we've installed the permanent marker on Hollywood Boulevard. And there's the installation. I don't know if you have the finished product or not. Yeah, there's the finished product. There I am standing with Lucky, the designer of this. So it's on there permanently now. And we also installed a Department of Transportation sign just directly adjacent to this that marks the historic occasion. There were about 40,000 marchers that day, all in support of solidarity for Black, trans, queer, people of color within the larger BLM movement. And it was an amazing historic event. And we just are still really enjoying the aftermath of that. And it's a permanent reminder of the work that needs to be done to make sure that no one gets left behind, no matter who you are, how you identify, what your background is, what language you speak, nothing. Now's the time to make sure that we have full equality for everyone and we dismantle the systems that create those inequalities.
Well, thank you so much. And you've done really incredible work from a policy perspective and obviously also from a personal perspective in furthering a lot of these really important issues and making space for conversation and action. Which kind of leads to the next question that I'd like to put both to you, Councilmember O'Farrell, and to Felicia. How can artists, such as the artists we have here today and many of the other artists who are working in that advocacy space, how do we create a space for artists to have a stronger voice? Who's at the table when we're talking about policy change and implementing really systemic, hopefully systemic changes that will move forward well into the future, that go beyond a mural on the street, which is great, but we want to see deeper, more meaningful change come out of these creative moments.
Felicia, I encourage you to say a few words, and I'll follow you.
Felicia, you're on mute.
Sorry. I think to answer your question, it is going to be critical for artists to come to the table, especially as some of the activity around the new legislation that the Councilmember O'Farrell addressed in terms of deassessing. The city does not have a deaccession policy for artworks or honorifics or monuments. We need one. Our collection, the city art collection, is about 100 years old. The public art collection is about 25 years old, and so we need to start thinking about these works much more comprehensively. And I also think that LA is in a unique position right now to be developing deaccession policy, given the issues around us, that we can actually create a policy and a direction that is meaningful and that takes into account all of the sentiments that the city is grappling with right now. So it will be critical for artists to be at the table to provide input, to give us their perspective about what goes and what stays and how we make those decisions. And I think from the department standpoint, artists are always at our table. Every artwork that I showed you images of, even this exhibition came out of a direction or an impetus, or was selected by a pool of artists or a team of artists. So within cultural affairs table, we constantly have artists at the table giving input and shaping and directing all of our programs. And I think at the policy level, it's critical that they show up at that table as well.
And just, I would add that I explained a little bit about where I come from in terms of my approach to supporting the arts and how that informs my policy. I want to do more and more and more for arts in Los Angeles, open the doors for more artists, more expression. Any world-class city has a world-class arts presence also. Now, Los Angeles being really I don't know what I would call it, the home of diversity, diverse opinions, people from all over the world, migrants, immigrants, you name it, we're the melting pot. We should have and deserve to have a really, really robust arts scene here. Public art, galleries, etc. Because I have always firmly believed and will believe someday when I'm no longer in public office that arts and artists and creativity is what informs civilization better than anyone else, anything else. And so I take my cues from arts, artistic expression, and that does definitely inform my approach. And I want to help facilitate just making sure that the city of LA is open to everyone and anyone for artistic expression that can be enjoyed by everyone. And whatever we need to do to facilitate more of that in a structured way, in an open way, in a more elevated way, then that's what I'm definitely signing up for. And it already has an informed policy. I mean, the deaccession policy, even some of the reform measures on public safety that I'm the signatory on, most of them. And it goes right into a lot of the policy that I'm working on now, working with the Actors Fund on creating permanent supportive housing for artists in Hollywood. And so, you know, artists need to make a living. Artists need subsidies in order to create and have that space. When I was a professional dancer, I struggled and I would wait tables in between gigs. I didn't have much time other than just making a living, especially here in Los Angeles. And so I could have used an amenity like affordable housing back in the day and I didn't have it, could have used it. So as a policymaker, I have that experience very, very deep in my being. So I want to work on policies that can help the current generation of artists in ways like that.
Well, it's great. It's wonderful that you have experience on both sides of that coin there, because I think that really does help to engender a lot more understanding for where people are coming from. I'd like to throw it back to the artists for a moment. Amir and Johanna, if you wouldn't mind just making a few last comments, and then we can open it up for questions. I'd like to hear if you feel like your voice is being heard. Do you feel like the system is open and receptive to what you want to communicate? And if not, what can happen? What would you like to see happen in order to make it better? And if it is, if you do feel that your voice is being heard, please, just talk a little bit about how you see the results of that and the impact of your work going beyond your immediate audience to have that larger community impact.
Sure. Amir, do you want to go first?
Sure. That's a question that I've been wrestling with all week. And the question is posed is if my voice is heard. I think yes, because I make work for my community. So it's kind of like as a Black man, when I walk down the street and I see another Black man and I give him a nod, it's like my way of saying I see you, I hear you. So with my work, yes. Now, if we're looking outside of that, I don't know. And I think, again, if we bring it back to what the Black community is enduring this week with Breonna Taylor, is our voice being heard? So the way that I look at it as an artist is to be able to create an archive so that there's not erasure of Black people, so that artists that come behind me are able to build off of that and use their form of artistic expression to continue to tell the narratives of my community.
Great, thank you. Johanna, any thoughts you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it of course depends on who's listening, right? I would like to acknowledge that I speak, from a place of privilege, white privilege. It is a privilege to be healthy, to be you know, able-bodied and educated. And I do think that my voice is heard within the smaller communities I exist in, within, you know, my friendships and love relationships, the queer community, different LA art communities, the institution which I teach, my students, the people who have taught me in the past and who continue to teach me, mentors and muses, the institutions which support my artwork, as well as the DIY and artist-run art spaces that have housed my work in the past. And as I make art, you know, I hope that it will have a wider audience, where I hope it resonates with a lot of people, where there are different, you know, entry points into the work. And that's why my process and practice takes up themes of kinship oftentimes, and grief, and how resistance and resilience of the body, but most importantly, you know, I'm interested again in how my students' voices are currently being heard. And I'm really interested in radical pedagogical shifts within institutions that I think need to occur and, you know, need to happen to give strength and freedom to the voices that come after me and those around me. And I guess, Sarah, the second part of the question of, you know, how to make things better, and it really resonated to me with what you said, Amir, about the hashtag in relation to Black bodies, where, you know, when I'm hearing how, let's say, the Christopher Columbus statue is being removed, I absolutely love that, but I'm like, why not have Los Angeles replace, you know, those places of historical violence with new monuments? Like, let's say the founders of Black Lives Matter, why are their bodies not being represented in terms of statues in this city?
I think there are some really interesting conversations to be had about what should go in the place of those monuments. And it sounds like both Councilmember O'Farrell's office and, of course, DCA and Felicia Filer are very involved in those conversations. Councilmember O'Farrell, you mentioned the idea of being on the cutting edge and you know, having these conversations around deaccession. And obviously, Felicia's office is working hard on addressing those issues as well. I think what's interesting in regard to what you just brought up, Johanna, is to look at other cities and sometimes the way that they've handled their controversies as well, to see what we can learn from that and bring to our community. And for instance, I know in New York City, when there were controversial monuments that came down, there are obviously problems that happened around that, but there was this desire to hold space by not doing anything for a while and allowing there to be communication and conversation and just a moment to let things calm down and have people exchange ideas and rest for a little bit. And just that moment of reflection before deciding what should replace that monument. And I was really inspired by that concept of, you know, thinking about taking away some of the images that are creating so much controversy and conflict and making people feel unwelcome and disrespected, and then give it some real thought about what we want to replace that with and how we want to move forward and look at what images and messages we put into the public space. And obviously that's probably one of the most fascinating parts of what Felicia does in her position as well. So Jamie, I'm looking at, there we go. If you have questions from the audience that you'd like to pose, I think now would be a really great time to open it up a little bit and get some questions from the people who've been participating. Do you have any questions? Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask? I'm not sure what the protocol is and whether you can raise your hand and speak. It looks like that's something that could be done if anybody wants to speak, or put a question or a comment into the chat box.
Just real quick, if you don't mind, I'll lean in while someone is formulating a question. Just real quick comments on what we just talked about. Look what happened in Richmond, Virginia with Monument Avenue. They didn't act, and they didn't act. And this has been building up for years and decades to stop putting Confederate generals who fell on the sword to protect slavery in the South. So the people took them down. that's what's going to happen if government doesn't act. And so monuments are falling. They're going to fall one way or another. And it's important that we lean in. With the Columbus statue that we took down a couple of years ago, the Tongva, the local Native American community, is working on replacing it with a Tongva symbol. So we actually completely flipped the switch where a Columbus statue once stood on Tongva ancestral land. The local Native American community will very likely replace that, honoring the very people whose land was stolen from them so that we could all live the life we're now living. And so that conversation has been happening now for a couple of years. That's likely the result that will happen with that particular pedestal that still stands in Grand Park. And as recently as this week, a motion was introduced on the LA City Council for the city to build a monument to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, I declined signing on to that because that's a lovely notion and she's amazing and she should be celebrated. But I think that's kind of where, Sarah, you mentioned, let's just pause for a second. I think we need to figure out as a city how to deal with monuments and how and who we celebrate before we start building monuments short and out of having no ordinance to actually address the issue in the first place.
Yeah, I'm going to try not to get on my soapbox about this, but I think that it is really important as part of that conversation for considering, you know, what we do as a community. It's not just about recognizing the challenges that we have in those, whether it's monuments or street names or park names or school names. I mean, you can unravel that sweater for a great distance. But, you know, really also thinking about the wisdom of making monuments to individuals, because people are complicated and there are lots of aspects to what people do throughout their life. And I think that as we recognize different challenges within our communities, you know, having those individual monuments up there can be problematic, no matter how wonderful we feel somebody is at one moment or another. So it's at least worth a really in-depth and inclusive conversation to have around some of those challenges. Do we have any questions yet? I don't want to be stepping on anybody's opportunity to speak. Oh, we do. We have a question here to both artists. In this time of misinformation in the public sphere, what is your approach to working with archives and projects that encompass documentary aspects? Johanna, do you want to talk to that first, or?
Sure. I mean, yes, since COVID, I haven't had access to any physical archives, so a lot of my work has been happening through, you know, digital archives and online resources. And I think, you know, I just always try and question the value of truth when it comes to specifically photography, right? Not knowing if what I'm looking at is a documentation of something real or sometimes something altered. And I guess also very much keeping in mind that any work I do with archive is, you know, coming from a very subjective place where it's, you know, me choosing which imagery or clips I'm deciding to put together. So I like to work with archives by including many different people and kind of also getting feedback from others in terms of the choices that I make, just so that I feel like it reaches a wide array of different bodies and in different communities.
Thank you. Amir, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I've actually been investigating people like Sadia Hartman and how she uses the term critical fabulation when thinking of working with the archives, in the sense of, for the research that I do, which does a lot of, which involves a lot of the transatlantic slave trade, archives are inherently omitting the Black body. So it's like, even if I'm working in the archives, I have to understand that I'm not necessarily going to get the information that I need. For example, if you're looking in archives of the transatlantic slave trade, Blacks are listed as cargo. So what City of Hartman has been investigating is taking the archives as far as it goes and then creating the narrative that's missing. So that's kind of like where I am, being in grad school, looking to do more conceptual type work and just creating the narratives that I feel like have been omitted, for people of color.
So this sort of leads into this next question and comment regarding whether now is the time to establish an archive, not only for protest art, but for the estates of deceased Los Angeles artists. The artists from the 60s, 70s, and 80s are dying off, and there's no place for their unsold work. And I think that there are some really interesting questions there to be considered in terms of the history of Los Angeles's art world. But obviously, there's also a place in which that is still not taking into account the concerns that we've been talking about today in terms of who's included in that canon. So you've got these artists who have been considered seminal artists within various movements throughout the last several decades, with obviously skewed against the communities that we're now paying attention to in terms of their narratives being ignored and left out of that canon. How would you reconcile that? What are your thoughts about preserving existing historic works and the works of recognized LA artists, as well as how that fits with the concept of reassessing the way that we archive materials to take into account those narratives that have been left out? And I suppose this could go to the artists as a question, or Felicia, certainly you've been involved for so many years with the city's collection, if you've got something to.
Yeah, it does raise a number of questions. Even, Sarah, you're an attorney, there's also estate issues that come up with, taking on an archive. But I think what we do know about the city's art collection, which is about 3,000 pieces, is that it does not represent the diversity of artists and people in Los Angeles. And the sort of intent behind the collection is to collect works of LA-based artists. And these works have been, basically donated to us over the past 100 years. We can look at that collection. We know, there's very little works by African American. There's very little works by Latino Americans, Indigenous, people, et cetera, Asian Americans. And so if we have to start with, sort of looking at our archives and sort of righting the wrong or creating some balance within that collection, then we're going to start with the facts in terms of who, who's not included, what works are missing, but beyond that, we would need to work with, I would say, historians, curators, artists to help build that collection. I think our collection really stops about the 90s. It was like about the last time that we started, receiving donations. And so, we're roughly 30 years out in terms of not having works that were created by artists in LA included in the collection. And we need to both bring the collection forward to to today's time, but also make sure that it represents the range of artists who exist in LA, and that goes by gender and racial equity.
Yeah, it does seem like right now is actually an excellent time to be taking a look at the opportunities available to archive Los Angeles artists, because we do have an opportunity to look back over those, certainly the last 30, if not many more years, and make sure that we are being sensitive to the narratives that have been excluded and those communities that have not been represented in the more popular art world scope of which artists are considered to be important. So I hope that there is room and time for those conversations and explorations to occur moving forward. That would be wonderful. Jamie, it looks like we are just about at the end of our time. Do you want to wrap it up?
Yes. Just thank you everyone so much for being here today, and just massive thanks to Sarah, Felicia, Amir, Johanna, and Councilmember O'Farrell for your incredibly thoughtful and personal presentations and sharing your insights. I hope this is the first of many similar conversations where we really talk about the power of art and policy to really as employed as a catalyst for change. Thank you again to everyone and LAMAG staff, DCA, our general manager, assistant general manager, public art, everyone, and also the Department on Disability for their services today. And just thank you all so much. And just one last plug, if you haven't seen the online show yet, I would encourage you to check it out. The first 3 sections are live, and the 4th section will be going live next Thursday. So please take a look and stay tuned for upcoming programming at virtually at the gallery. And with that, did you want to mention anything else, Sarah, or
I would just love to say thank you to everybody on the panel. You are all wonderful and interesting and fantastic. I hope this conversation continues and certainly sparks thoughts and contributions from many others. And Jamie, thank you again for putting this together. This was great.
Yeah, it was a team effort. So just, yeah, thank you again. Really massive thanks to all of our speakers and to just everyone who made it possible. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And please take care of yourselves, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane, and we'll hopefully see you again soon.